The night was cold in Paris, and the air thick with the smell of burning wood and melting flesh. On March 18th, 1314, a man stood bound to a wooden stake on a small island in the Seine River. His name was Jacques de Molay, and though he appeared as nothing more than a weary old prisoner, in truth he carried with him the weight of one of the most powerful and mysterious organizations in medieval history. As the flames began to rise, licking at his body, the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar refused to cry out. Instead, he turned his gaze toward the cathedral skyline and spoke words that would echo across centuries. A curse, a prophecy, and a promise of reckoning. Witnesses said that de Molay's voice carried with uncanny clarity, even through the crackle of fire. He called upon King Philip IV of France and Pope Clement V, condemning them both to face judgment within a year. It was not the desperate scream of a man facing his end, but the calm declaration of one who seemed to know that history itself would vindicate him. And in a twist that still unsettles historians, both men, the king and the pope, were indeed dead within 12 months of de Molay's execution. To the faithful, it was divine justice. To the skeptical, it was coincidence. But to those attuned to the undercurrents of history, it was something more, a signal that secrets have been buried, truths silenced, and a dangerous legacy suppressed by those in power. The death of Jacques de Molay was not just the extinguishing of a life. It was the symbolic erasure of the Knights Templar, a brotherhood of warrior monks who had risen from obscurity in the Holy Land to become the guardians of vast wealth, ancient knowledge, and possibly even forbidden truths about the origins of Christianity itself. The Vatican, in collusion with the French crown, sought not only to destroy the order, but to erase what they represented. For many, the execution was the closing of a chapter. Yet for others, it was the beginning of a mystery that has haunted Europe ever since. What exactly did the Vatican hide after the last Grand Master was burned alive? To understand the gravity of that night, one must imagine the spectacle. The island where de Molay was executed lay within sight of Notre Dame Cathedral, the great Gothic heart of Paris. Crowds gathered to watch the downfall of the man once feared as the head of a state within a state, whose knights had answered only to God and the Pope, and whose coffers rivaled those of kings. But this execution was more than justice or vengeance. It was theater, a demonstration of power meant to crush dissent and obliterate memory. By burning de Molay alive, King Philip IV and Pope Clement V were not simply punishing a heretic. They were making a statement to the world. The Templars' secrets would burn with him. Yet, secrets have a strange way of surviving fire. Whispers spread that de Molay's curse was not merely an act of defiance, but the final key in a chain of hidden knowledge. Some claimed he was the last keeper of relics unearthed in Jerusalem, treasures buried beneath the Temple Mount that challenged the official narrative of the Church. Others believed he carried with him the inner teachings of the Templar Order, rituals and doctrines that drew from Gnostic, Islamic, and Jewish mysticism, knowledge so dangerous that Rome could not permit it to circulate. And still others insisted the Templars had safeguarded a relic far greater than gold or parchment, the Holy Grail itself, whether as a chalice, a bloodline, or a symbol of hidden wisdom. Whatever the truth, the Vatican was determined that the world would never know. The flames consumed de Molay, but not the legend. For centuries, his death has remained one of history's most haunting executions. Chroniclers of the time remarked on the eerie solemnity of his composure, his refusal to beg for mercy. In the Middle Ages, fire was meant not only to kill, but to erase, the body reduced to ash, the memory reduced to silence. Yet with Jacques de Molay, the attempt backfired. Instead of erasure, his burning ignited questions. Instead of silence, it birthed whispers of conspiracy, curses, and suppressed truths that would follow the Vatican like a shadow. What gives this story its enduring power is the uncanny fulfillment of the prophecy. Pope Clement V, already sickly, died within weeks of the burning. King Philip IV, strong and ruthless, was killed in a hunting accident within a year. To contemporaries, this was divine retribution. To later generations, it was a clue that the Templars had been far more than soldiers or bankers. How could an old man bound to a stake speak such a curse unless he was armed with knowledge the world was never meant to see? Was it simply faith that gave his words power, or something he had carried with him, perhaps entrusted to him from the depths of the Templar vaults? The Vatican's role in this execution remains the most enigmatic. It was not merely the French king who sought the Templars' downfall, though he had much to gain from seizing their wealth. The Church itself had reasons to fear them. The Templars operated with a degree of independence that made popes uneasy, and their exposure to Eastern traditions during the Crusades suggested the possibility of heretical influences. Some modern historians argue that the charges of idol worship and blasphemy were fabrications. Others suspect that these accusations, while exaggerated, had kernels of truth. Could the Vatican have burned de Molay not to punish his heresy, but to bury it? Could the secrets he held have undermined the authority of the Church, if revealed? The tragedy of that March night is more than the death of one man. It is the rupture of a narrative. Mainstream history tells us the Templars were guilty of nothing more than threatening royal and papal power through their wealth. But alternative histories whisper that de Molay's execution was the lid slammed shut on a chest of revelations. Some believe the Vatican hid documents that told a different story of Jesus and early Christianity. Others insist the Templars had uncovered ancient technologies or mystical practices that threatened to destabilize the Church's monopoly on truth. What is certain is that the Vatican archives contain records from the trial that were hidden for centuries, only rediscovered in modern times. Why suppress absolution documents unless the truth they contained was too dangerous? So, as Jacques de Molay's body crumbled into ash on that island, what else was consigned to the flames? Was it only the man, or an entire worldview? One where faith was not mediated by Rome, where knowledge was drawn from many wells, and where the divine might be encountered outside the boundaries of orthodoxy. The Vatican ensured that such questions would remain unanswered, but in doing so, it ensured something else, that the mystery would never die. His burning was meant to end the Templar story. Instead, it marked the beginning of a legend that has refused to fade for over 700 years. And so we begin our journey with that fire, with the smoke that curled into the night sky over Paris. Because if we want to understand what the Vatican hid after the last Grand Master was burned alive, we must start with the chilling certainty that his death was not the end, but the beginning of a secret history, one that continues to haunt the world, even now. In the early 12th century, Jerusalem was a city of dust and blood. The First Crusade had ended in 1099 with rivers of slaughter, Christian armies seizing the holy city from Muslim control. Pilgrims began to flow eastward, eager to walk in the footsteps of Christ. But the roads that led to Jerusalem were not paths of peace. Bandits, mercenaries, and raiders haunted every stretch of desert. Many who set out never returned, their bodies lost to the sands. It was in this crucible of fear and faith that a small group of knights made a vow that would change the course of history. They promised not to serve kings or princes, but to dedicate their swords to God and to protect those who came to walk the sacred streets of the Holy Land. Their names were almost forgotten at the time: Hugh de Payens, Godfrey de Saint-Omer, and 7 others. They were poor knights, so poor, in fact, that legend claimed they shared one horse between them. But their vow bound them together, and in 1119 they presented themselves to King Baldwin II of Jerusalem. Their request was audacious: a headquarters on the Temple Mount itself, the most sacred and contested ground in the city. To the shock of many, Baldwin agreed. They were given quarters in the former Al-Aqsa Mosque, which stood on the very platform where Solomon's temple had once risen in ancient glory. From this beginning, the Knights of the Temple, soon called the Templars, were born. At first, they were only a handful of men, monks in armor, guided by a vision greater than themselves. They swore oaths of poverty, chastity, and obedience, but unlike other monks, they carried swords and shields. They became monk knights, a paradox that fascinated Europe. To many, It seemed impossible. How could one follow Christ, who preached peace, while killing in his name? Yet the Templars reconciled this contradiction. They argued that to defend pilgrims was not murder, but holy service. To shed blood for God was not sin, but sacrifice. In this way, they became living contradictions, warriors who prayed and prayed as they fought. It did not take long for their reputation to spread. In 1129, at the Council of Troyes, the Templars were officially recognized by the Church, with none other than Bernard of Clairvaux, one of the most powerful abbots of the age, defending them. Bernard described them as warriors of God, combining the courage of knights with the purity of monks. His words gave them legitimacy, and soon donations poured in from across Europe. Lords and kings gave land, peasants gave coin, widows left their estates to the order. Within a generation, the poor knights who had once shared a single horse became one of the richest organizations in Christendom. But the Templars were more than warriors. They were visionaries who saw how power could be extended beyond the battlefield. Their network of commanderies stretched from the Holy Land to England, Portugal, France, and beyond. A pilgrim traveling to Jerusalem could deposit money with the Templars in Paris, receive a coded letter, and withdraw funds safely in the East. In essence, the Templars invented a medieval form of banking, their letters of credit acting as the forerunner of modern checks. This innovation made them indispensable to kings and merchants alike. As their influence grew, so did the myths surrounding them. Pilgrims whispered that the Templars guarded not just roads, but secrets, arcane knowledge unearthed beneath the Temple Mount. Some said they discovered relics hidden since the days of Solomon. Others claimed they uncovered scrolls older than the Gospels themselves, documents that could shake the foundations of Christianity. Whatever the truth, their proximity to the temple gave rise to suspicions that they possessed wisdom the Vatican either could not or would not share. What made the Templars truly remarkable was their dual nature. To one world, they were a standing army of Christ, riding under the banner of the Red Cross, feared by Saracens and revered by Christians. To another, they were landlords, bankers, and administrators, their estates feeding wealth back into their war machine. This combination of military prowess and financial power was unprecedented. They answered only to the Pope, and even kings could not command them. By the middle of the 12th century, the Templars had become a state within a state, an organization that transcended borders and thrones. Their wealth was legendary. They owned castles, farms, vineyards, and ports. They controlled trade routes and established fortresses across the Mediterranean. Pilgrims who once feared the roads now walked under the Templars' protection, and even monarchs turned to them for loans. Kings went to war with money borrowed from the temple. The Red Cross became a symbol not only of protection, but of power, a sign that the bearer was shielded by the most feared and wealthy brotherhood in Christendom. Yet, even at the height of their fame, the Templars remained cloaked in secrecy. Their initiation rituals were never publicly revealed. Rumors spread of strange oaths, whispered words, and symbolic gestures hidden from the world. Some accused them of kissing one another in odd ceremonies, of spitting on the cross as a test of loyalty, of worshiping a mysterious idol. While much of this may have been slander, the aura of mystery clung to them. The Vatican tolerated these whispers so long as the order served its purpose in the Holy Land, but unease lingered beneath the surface. As the Crusades wore on, the Templars' role grew more controversial. Their victories in battle were celebrated, but their failures were costly. When Jerusalem fell to Saladin in 1187, the Templars fought valiantly, but could not hold the city. Still, their reputation for bravery was unmatched. Muslim chroniclers wrote of their ferocity, noting that the Templars would fight to the last man rather than surrender. They were both respected and hated, feared as fanatics, yet admired as warriors who never yielded. By the 13th century, however, the Crusades were waning. Christian footholds in the Holy Land collapsed one by one, and the Templars found themselves retreating to Cyprus. No longer the guardians of Jerusalem, they turned increasingly to their financial and political power in Europe. Here, their dual nature became dangerous. Kings who had once borrowed from them now envied their wealth. The church, which had raised them up, began to see them as rivals. Their independence, their secrecy, and their wealth combined into a threat that could not be ignored. But in those early days, none of this was yet visible. The Templars seemed unstoppable, blessed by God, rising from poverty to unimaginable power in less than a century. Their story was one of divine providence, or so it appeared. Yet even in their ascent, shadows gathered. Their base on the Temple Mount, their hidden rituals, their wealth that grew beyond measure. All of it planted seeds of suspicion, seeds that would one day be watered by fear, envy, and betrayal. The rise of the Templars was meteoric, a blaze of faith and ambition that lit up medieval Europe. But as every flame burns brightly, it also casts deep shadows. And within those shadows lay the secrets that would one day bring them into conflict with kings, with popes, and with the Vatican itself. Their story began in poverty and piety, but it would end in fire and ash. Beneath the blazing sun of Jerusalem, the Temple Mount stood as both a symbol and a riddle. To Christians of the 12th century, it was the place where Christ had walked and taught, where the Jewish temple had once risen in majesty, and where God's presence had been said to dwell in the Holy of Holies. To Muslims, it was the site of the Prophet's night journey, the sacred Al-Aqsa Mosque standing as a living testament to faith. And to the Knights Templar, newly granted quarters within its walls, it was something else entirely, a place where the whispers of legend and the weight of Scripture converged. From the very beginning, their residence on the Temple Mount raised eyebrows. The small band of knights could have been housed anywhere in the city, yet King Baldwin II offered them quarters atop the holiest and most contested ground in Jerusalem. Was this simply an act of reverence, granting warriors of Christ a home at the heart of sacred history? Or was it something more deliberate, a calculated decision to place them exactly where ancient secrets might still lie buried? For nearly a decade, the Templars lived atop that mount. Outwardly, they performed their duty as protectors of pilgrims, guarding the dangerous roads to the city. But rumors began to circulate. Locals and travelers alike whispered of strange activities under cover of darkness. The knights were seen less on patrol and more within the confines of their quarters. Some claimed they were not merely living atop the Temple Mount, but digging beneath it. What were they searching for? According to medieval chronicles, the Temple Mount had always carried a mystique. It was said that beneath its stones lay chambers, tunnels, and vaults stretching back to the time of Solomon. Ancient Jewish texts spoke of treasures hidden before the Babylonians destroyed the first temple. Later legends insisted the Ark of the Covenant, the golden chest that carried the tablets of Moses, had been concealed here, never to be found again. Could it be that the Templars, guided by knowledge lost to the ages, were unearthing these mysteries? Evidence is scarce, but tantalizing hints remain. In the 1860s, engineers conducting surveys beneath the Temple Mount discovered a network of tunnels and chambers, some of which had been disturbed centuries earlier. Marks on the walls suggested digging with tools not from antiquity, but from a medieval period. Scholars have long speculated that the Templars were responsible. If so, the question remains, what did they find? Some claim they uncovered scrolls, ancient texts written in Hebrew or Aramaic, containing esoteric wisdom from the time of Solomon. Others whisper of documents that challenged the official version of Christianity, Gnostic Gospels, alternative teachings of Jesus, or records connecting him to bloodlines and dynasties the Church did not want revealed. Still others believe the Templars sought relics, the menorah from the temple, the Holy Grail, or even the Ark itself. If they did make such discoveries, they would not have revealed them openly. The Templars' reputation for secrecy was already forming. Their oaths bound them to silence, and their allegiance to the Pope gave them access to corridors of power where knowledge could be shared or suppressed away from the public eye. It is entirely possible that treasures from beneath the Temple Mount were quietly transferred to Europe, hidden in commanderies, vaults, or even the Vatican itself. Mainstream historians dismiss much of this as speculation, noting the lack of direct evidence. But the sheer persistence of these stories cannot be ignored. Across centuries, chroniclers, mystics, and even rival orders repeated the same idea, that the Templars had discovered something beneath the temple that gave them not only wealth, but influence. An influence they had. Within a generation, their rise was meteoric, their coffers overflowing, their power rivaling that of kings. Was it merely their efficiency as bankers and warriors, or did they hold knowledge that gave them leverage over both throne and altar? There is another possibility, one even more unsettling. The Temple Mount had been a crossroads of civilizations for millennia. Assyrians, Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, and Romans had all walked its stones. Each left fragments of their beliefs, inscriptions, and rituals. The Templars, steeped in Christian devotion, were suddenly confronted with this mosaic of traditions. Could their years on the Mount have exposed them to mystical teachings beyond the narrow scope of Catholic orthodoxy? Some believe the order absorbed elements of Jewish Kabbalah, Islamic Sufism, and ancient Hermetic philosophy. If so, the treasure they unearthed was not physical, but intellectual, an initiation into a deeper current of spiritual truth that Rome considered heresy. This possibility explains much about their later accusations. When the Templars were arrested, they were charged with spitting on the cross, worshipping strange idols, and conducting secret rituals. To the Vatican, these were signs of blasphemy. But perhaps they were misunderstood echoes of wisdom drawn from the Temple Mount. Practices foreign to Orthodox Christianity, yet rooted in older traditions that predated it. If the Templars had indeed touched the living current of hidden knowledge beneath Solomon's temple, then their eventual destruction becomes more comprehensible. For the Church could not allow such dangerous currents to undermine its authority. Even centuries later, the idea of the Templars' excavation persists in art and literature. The image of knights with torches descending into ancient vaults, dust swirling around stone arches, treasures glinting in the dark. It is a scene both fantastical and eerily plausible. What is certain is that their choice of headquarters was no accident. They lived not beside the temple, but on top of it. And history tells us that when powerful men place themselves atop holy ground, it is never without reason. If the Templars did find something beneath the Temple Mount, its impact cannot be measured solely in coins or castles. It would have shaped their vision of the world, their understanding of faith, and their dangerous independence from both kings and popes. For once a man holds knowledge that transcends dogma, he becomes ungovernable. And ungovernable men are the greatest threat of all. As the years passed, the Templars grew stronger, their mystique deepened by rumors of what they had seen beneath the stones of Jerusalem. But secrets have a cost. The Vatican, even in the 12th century, must have wondered what their loyal knights had uncovered, and whether it aligned with, or threatened, the teachings of Rome. By granting them the Temple Mount, had they opened a door that could never again be closed? The truth remains buried, both in stone and in archives. But if we trace the Templar's story from their humble beginnings to their fiery end, one theme emerges again and again. Hidden knowledge, unearthed in the East, suppressed in the West. And the first chapter of that secret begins not in France or Rome, but in the hollow vaults of Jerusalem, where the stones of Solomon whispered their mysteries to the men who would one day be burned alive for knowing too much. By the middle of the 12th century, whispers about the Templars began to spread across Europe. On the surface, they were pious defenders of the faith, knights who lived under strict vows, who prayed, fasted, and rode into battle with the red cross emblazoned on their chests. But behind the stone walls of their commanderies, rumors grew. Their rituals were said to be secret, their initiations hidden from all but the brothers themselves. To the outside world, this secrecy was unnerving. What were these men doing in the shadows? And why did the Church, usually quick to condemn heresy, turned a blind eye for so long. The charges that would one day be leveled against them were extraordinary. They were accused of spitting on the crucifix during their initiation, of renouncing Christ, of kissing one another on the mouth, on the navel, even on the base of the spine. They were accused of worshiping a mysterious idol called Baphomet, sometimes described as a severed head, sometimes as a horned figure. They were accused of keeping relics hidden away, of practicing sorcery, and of mocking the sacraments of the Church. To medieval minds, such accusations painted a picture of a brotherhood that had strayed far from God. But were these charges true? Or were they clever inventions designed to destroy an order that had grown too wealthy and powerful? Many historians argue that the accusations were political slander, concocted by King Philip IV of France, who coveted the Templar fortune. Yet even among skeptics, there is an acknowledgement that the order was different, that its rituals may indeed have carried elements foreign to Orthodox Christianity. The Templars had spent nearly 2 centuries in the Holy Land, exposed to Islamic philosophy, Jewish mysticism, and even the remnants of ancient pagan traditions that lingered in the East. Could it be that their practices absorbed ideas the Catholic Church deemed unacceptable? The figure of Baphomet, for instance, remains enigmatic. Was it truly a demonic idol, as the Church claimed? Or was the word itself a corruption, perhaps from Muhammad, a medieval mistranslation of Muhammad, suggesting that the Templars had incorporated Islamic reverence into their practices? Others suggest it derived from the Greek baphimetis, absorption of wisdom. If so, Baphomet was not a demon, but a symbol of knowledge, the very thing the Templars were accused of hoarding. Whatever the truth, the image of the horned, half-human, half-animal figure would later become immortalized in esoteric lore, embraced by occultists as a symbol of hidden wisdom and balance. Then there were the claims of spitting on the cross. To the Church, this was blasphemy of the highest order. But what if it was never intended as mockery? Some scholars believe it may have been a ritual of psychological testing. By asking recruits to desecrate the symbol of Christ, the Templars could ensure that only those utterly loyal to the Brotherhood and willing to endure appearances of heresy for the sake of secrecy would pass. In this interpretation, the ritual was not about rejecting Christ, but about proving obedience to the order above all else. The Templars were also accused of denying the sacraments of the Church, particularly confession and absolution. Yet there is evidence that the order had its own internal system of spiritual practice, separate from the authority of priests. Their chaplains answered only to the order, not to bishops. This independence created suspicion. To the Vatican, it hinted at heresy, a brotherhood that considered itself capable of offering forgiveness without Rome's blessing. To the Templars, it may simply have been practicality. On distant battlefields, far from churches, they needed their own system. But the effect was the same. It distanced them from orthodoxy. There are also tantalizing hints that the Templars embraced elements of Gnostic thought. The Gnostics, condemned as heretics centuries earlier, believed that salvation came not through the Church, but through secret knowledge, gnosis, revealed to a chosen few. They saw the material world as a prison and the divine spark as something hidden within. It is not hard to see parallels in the Templars' secrecy, their initiations, their obsession with hidden wisdom. If they absorbed even fragments of these teachings, they would have appeared to the Vatican as dangerously close to reviving a long-buried heresy. Equally possible is that the Templars drew inspiration from Jewish Kabbalah and Islamic Sufism, both of which were flourishing in the Middle East during their time there. Kabbalah offered mystical interpretations of Scripture, hidden meanings within words and numbers, pathways to the divine beyond ritual law. Sufism spoke of union with God through inner transformation, of truths beyond the reach of dogma. To knights accustomed to the rigid authority of the Catholic Church, these ideas must have seemed like glimpses into a deeper current of truth. To Rome, however, they were poison. All of this raises a haunting question. What if the Templars had indeed created their own spiritual system, a fusion of traditions, born from their time in Jerusalem and their access to the Temple Mount? What if their rituals, so maligned as heretical, were in fact attempts to guard knowledge that the Vatican feared would undermine its authority? The secrecy of the order ensured that answers would be scarce. Their initiations were closed to outsiders, and brothers were bound by vows never to reveal what took place. When the arrest came in 1307, torture forced many to confess. Yet under duress, men will say anything. One prisoner might declare he spat on the cross, while another swore he worshipped the head. But these confessions contradict one another, their details shifting like smoke. Was there truly heresy, or were these fragments of rituals misunderstood, twisted by interrogators, and preserved only in distorted form? To this day, no one knows. But the fact that the Vatican treated these accusations with such gravity speaks volumes. The Church has faced countless heresies in its history, movements that preached alternative visions of Christ, sects that challenged papal authority. Most were condemned and quickly forgotten. Yet the Templars were different. Their power, their wealth, and their mysterious practices combined into something Rome could not easily dismiss. And so, the accusations were not just about doctrine. They were about control. If the Templars truly possessed hidden teachings, whether drawn from Gnosticism, Kabbalah, or ancient scrolls unearthed beneath the Temple Mount, then their destruction becomes less about greed and more about silencing a dangerous rival to orthodoxy. The Vatican could not afford to let such ideas spread. Better to brand them heretics, burn their leaders, and bury their secrets. But secrets do not die so easily. The accusations of heresy, though intended to destroy the Templars, instead gave birth to legends. The image of the order as keepers of forbidden wisdom has endured for 7 centuries, fueling speculation that beneath the flames of their destruction lay a truth too dangerous for Rome to allow. And so we are left with the haunting paradox. Were the Templars guilty of heresy, or guilty only of knowing too much? Did they truly worship dark idols, or did they protect sacred knowledge the Church feared? Whatever the reality, the Vatican's actions ensured that we may never know. The silence left behind is more telling than any confession, more powerful than any denial. For silence, in history, is rarely innocent. The year was 1307. It began like any other for the knights who still remained in Europe, tending to their estates, their temples, and their financial networks. Yet in the shadows, a storm was gathering. King Philip IV of France, desperate for money and threatened by the Templars' power, prepared a strike so sudden, so absolute, that history would never forget it. His motive was clear. He was bankrupt, his wars had drained the royal treasury, and his debts to the Templars had grown suffocating. To destroy them was not only to eliminate his creditors. It was to seize their fortune and neutralize a rival power that answered only to Rome. But Philip knew he could not move openly without justification. He needed the appearance of righteousness, the cloak of divine sanction. So, whispers were planted in the right ears. Dark rumors of heresy spread with careful intent. The Templars were accused of blasphemies too shocking for the Christian mind to ignore: spitting on the cross, renouncing Christ, worshipping idols, practicing sorcery. For the average peasant, these charges were unthinkable. For the clergy, they were intolerable. And for Philip, they were the perfect weapon. On the night of October 12th, sealed orders were distributed to royal officials across France. They were told not to open them until the appointed hour. The king's secret was too volatile, too dangerous to risk exposure. When dawn broke on Friday, October 13th, 1307, the trap was sprung. Across France, soldiers stormed Templar commanderies. Knights who had grown accustomed to a life of relative peace in Europe were dragged from their beds, shackled, and thrown into dungeons. Their property was seized, their accounts frozen, their reputations shattered in an instant. It was no ordinary arrest. It was a purge on a scale unprecedented. Hundreds of knights were taken in a single day, their fate sealed before they even knew what crime they were accused of. The swiftness of the operation revealed the depth of Philip's planning. Nothing had been left to chance. Friday the 13th would forever carry the shadow of this moment. The day superstition and history intertwined in blood and betrayal. The imprisoned Templars soon learned the accusations against them, but they were given little chance to speak in their defense. Torture chambers became their courts, racks and flames their judges. Men were stretched until their joints dislocated, their flesh seared, their will broken. In such conditions, confessions came easily. Yes, they spat on the cross. Yes, they renounced Christ. Yes, they worshipped an idol. Yes, they practiced obscene rituals. Anything to stop the agony. The confessions were recorded, not as the cries of men in torment, but as evidence of guilt. Yet, even under torture, the stories did not align. Some claimed the idol was a head with a long beard. Others swore it was a cat. Still others described it as a shining face. These contradictions should have raised doubt, but for Philip they were irrelevant. He had what he wanted, testimony of heresy, enough to poison the Templars in the eyes of the public. The Pope, Clement V, at first hesitated. The Templars were, after all, an order sanctioned by the Holy See. Their loyalty had been to the Church, not to kings. But Philip's pressure was relentless, his control over France absolute. He demanded that Rome cooperate in the trials. The Pope yielded, authorizing investigations across Christendom. What had begun as a French purge now spread like wildfire through Europe. Not every ruler shared Philip's zeal. In England, Edward II initially resisted the arrests, doubting the accusations. In Portugal, King Denis quietly restructured the order into a new brotherhood, the Order of Christ, allowing the Knights to continue under a different name. In Germany, many Templars simply melted away, protected by sympathetic nobles. But in France, the heart of Philip's power, the order was finished. Among those captured was Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master himself. Trusted, dignified, and unyielding, de Molay had led the order through its final years. He was seized in Paris and imprisoned along with other high-ranking officials. Under torture, even he confessed, though he later retracted his words, insisting on the innocence of the Brotherhood. His wavering confessions would become a central drama of the trials. Was he guilty, or was he a man broken by agony, struggling to protect his brothers while maintaining his own faith? The trials dragged on for years, a theater of humiliation designed to strip the Templars of dignity and legitimacy. Priests denounced them from pulpits. Chroniclers recorded their supposed sins. Relics of idols were discovered and paraded as proof. Yet beneath the noise, something darker was happening. The Templars' lands, their treasuries, their archives, all fell into the hands of the crown or were transferred to rival orders like the Hospitallers. Whatever knowledge they might have preserved, whatever scrolls, artifacts, or relics they had carried from Jerusalem, disappeared into the shadows of royal vaults or papal archives. And so the real mystery begins. Did Philip uncover something extraordinary, something worth erasing from history? Or did he merely fabricate a case to cover his theft? The Vatican's later secrecy suggests that more was at stake than money. Documents from the trials were hidden away, locked in the archives, inaccessible for centuries. If the charges were simple lies, why preserve them under such careful guard? If the order was merely guilty of greed, why not let the story fade? Friday, October 13th, 1307, remains one of history's great turning points. It was the day an entire order of warrior monks was shattered, the day superstition was born of blood. To this day, Friday the 13th carries whispers of misfortune, of cursed events, of unseen dangers. Few remember its origin, but the shadow of that dawn still lingers. The purge was not just the destruction of a brotherhood. It was the beginning of a legend of betrayal, secrecy, and forbidden truths. The knights who once carried the cross now carried chains. Yet their fall would not erase them. If anything, it would immortalize them, ensuring that their secrets, whether real or imagined, would echo through history far louder than their swords ever had. In that single coordinated strike, Philip believed he had destroyed the Templars. But in reality, he had created something more dangerous, a mystery that would never die. The arrests of October 1307 had shattered the Templar Order in France, but the real destruction would unfold in the months and years that followed. Shackled in damp cells, deprived of sunlight and comfort, the Knights now faced the machinery of medieval justice, a system that cared little for truth and everything for confession. To the crown, a man's innocence meant nothing. What mattered was submission, and submission was extracted with instruments of pain. In the interrogation chambers of Paris and beyond, the Templars learned quickly that silence was impossible. Their captors wielded devices designed to break not only the body but the will. The rack stretched limbs until tendons tore and joints popped from their sockets. Iron boots crushed bones with steady pressure. Whips tore flesh, leaving raw wounds that festered. Fire was applied to sensitive parts of the body, not to kill, but to coax words. No man could withstand such torments forever, and so the confessions poured forth. Some knights admitted to spitting on the cross, others to denying Christ, still others to worshiping idols or engaging in strange rites. Each confession was recorded carefully, added to the growing ledger of guilt. Yet the stories contradicted one another, their details changing from man to man. The idol called Baphomet, for example, was described in wildly different forms, sometimes a bearded head, sometimes a skull, sometimes a grotesque statue. These contradictions did not matter to the inquisitors. In fact, they strengthened the illusion of guilt. If so many knights confessed under torture, then surely there must be some truth to the charges. At the highest levels, however, doubt lingered. Pope Clement V, though installed largely through Philip's influence, was uneasy about the proceedings. The Templars were, after all, a papal order. To condemn them outright would be to admit that the Church itself had erred in creating and sanctioning them. At first, Clement resisted, demanding custody of the knights and urging restraint. But Philip pressed relentlessly, producing stacks of confessions as evidence. To the king, the case was already closed. The order was guilty, their heresy proven beyond question. The Pope, caught between loyalty to Rome and fear of alienating a powerful monarch, wavered. In 1308, he issued the papal bull Pastoralis Preeminentia, which commanded rulers across Christendom to arrest Templars and seize their assets. What had begun as a French purge now became a Europe-wide inquisition. Yet outside France, the evidence was far weaker. In England, Germany, and Spain, many knights denied the charges, and the confessions obtained in France seemed tainted by coercion. Still, the weight of papal authority could not be ignored. The trial spread, each region handling the matter in its own way. Back in France, the process became increasingly grotesque. Public hearings were staged in Paris, with groups of knights brought forth to repeat their confessions before clerics and scribes. Some, broken by torture, complied, their voices hollow. Others retracted their words, insisting they had confessed only under duress. But retractions brought swift punishment. A knight who denied his earlier testimony risked being burned alive as a relapsed heretic. The choice was stark: repeat the lie and live in chains, or speak the truth and die in fire. The spectacle served a dual purpose. To the people of Paris, it portrayed the Templars as monsters exposed by divine justice. To the crown, it legitimized the seizure of their property. Yet beneath the surface, the process reeked of theater. Evidence was weak, contradictions glaring, but the outcome had been predetermined. The king needed the order destroyed, and the Pope, trapped by politics, would eventually comply. One of the most striking moments came in 1310, when a group of 54 Templars who had retracted their confessions were condemned as relapsed heretics. They were marched out to the fields near Paris, tied to stakes, and set ablaze. Eyewitnesses reported that they went to their deaths proclaiming the innocence of the order, refusing to repent, their voices rising above the crackle of flames. This mass execution shocked many, planting seeds of doubt about the justice of the proceedings. But for Philip, it was a necessary warning. Defiance would not be tolerated. The trials also revealed something deeply unsettling. Even under the harshest tortures, some knights refused to confess. They endured agony without yielding, declaring to the end that the order was pure, that no blasphemies had ever taken place. Their silence was more dangerous to Philip than any confession. If even a handful of knights could resist, then whispers might spread that the charges were false. Thus, those who resisted were often executed swiftly, their defiance erased before it could inspire others. Meanwhile, Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, remained a central figure in the drama. Under pressure, he too confessed to heresy, admitting that the initiation rituals involved denying Christ and spitting on the cross. But later, in public, he recanted, insisting that the order had been betrayed, that its men were faithful Christians. His wavering testimony symbolized the impossible position of the knights, damned if they confessed, damned if they resisted. Clement, perhaps sensing the injustice, attempted at times to moderate the process. He called for councils, examined reports, and even absolved some Templars who confessed sincerely and sought forgiveness. But he could never fully free himself from Philip's grip. The king held the real power, and the Pope, ensnared by politics, gradually moved toward dissolving the order altogether. By 1312, the Council of Vienne was convened to decide the fate of the Templars. Bishops and clerics from across Europe gathered, bringing their testimonies and reports. The evidence was contradictory, often flimsy, but the political pressure was overwhelming. Under Philip's watchful eye, Clement declared the suppression of the order, not because of proven heresy, but because of the scandal and suspicion their presence had caused. It was, in effect, a political execution disguised as spiritual judgment. For the knights who remained imprisoned, the ruling was devastating. Their lands were confiscated, their wealth transferred, their brotherhood dissolved. Some were absorbed into other orders like the Hospitallers, others faded into obscurity. Yet for those who had confessed under torture, absolution was a cruel joke. Their words, extracted in agony, had sealed the fate of their brothers and destroyed their legacy. The interrogations and trials revealed more about the fears of kings and popes than about the truth of the Templars. They exposed the fragility of power, the lengths to which rulers would go to protect their authority. The Vatican, instead of standing as a beacon of justice, became complicit in the destruction of its own creation. The secrecy that surrounded the order's rituals had been its strength, but in the end, it was turned into a weapon. What could not be understood was branded as heresy, and what could not be controlled was destroyed. But in trying to erase the Templars, the Church and the Crown created something far greater than an order of knights. They created a mystery that would outlast them both. For the contradictions of the confessions, the secrecy of the Vatican archives, and the whispered defiance of men burned alive left the world with questions that no amount of official judgment could answer. By the spring of 1314, the fate of the Knights Templar had been sealed. Their lands were gone, their brotherhood dissolved, their name branded forever with the mark of heresy. Yet one last act remained, the execution of their highest leaders, the men who had once commanded armies, negotiated with kings, and carried the banner of the cross into battle. At the center of it all stood Jacques de Molay, the Grand Master, who had led the order through its darkest years. De Molay had already endured years of imprisonment, torture, and humiliation. He had confessed under duress, then recanted, then confessed again. He had been broken and rebuilt by inquisitors who sought not truth but compliance. Now, after endless trials and councils, the decision was made. He and 3 other senior officials, the preceptor of Normandy, the commander of Cyprus, and the treasurer of the order, would face execution. Their deaths would serve as the final punctuation mark on the story of the Templars. On March 18, 1314, the stage was set in Paris. A wooden scaffold was erected on the Isle de la site, the very heart of the city, where crowds gathered to watch history play out. The execution was meant to be a spectacle, a demonstration of royal power and papal authority. The people were told they would see heretics receive, they're just punishment, their sins purged in fire. But what unfolded that day would become one of the most haunting episodes in medieval history. As de Molay and his companions were brought forth, bound and weary, their fate seemed inevitable. They were to make final public confessions, repeat the words that had been forced from them under torture, and beg forgiveness. Then they would be sentenced to lifelong imprisonment, a fate humiliating but merciful. This was the plan, an ending that would quietly close the book on the Templars without further controversy. But Jacques de Molay had endured too much, and something in him refused to die in silence. When the moment came for him to speak, he did not repeat his forced confessions. Instead, with a steady voice that carried across the square, he proclaimed the innocence of the order. He declared that the Templars had been betrayed, not by their own sins, but by lies and greed. He insisted that he and his brothers were faithful Christians, that their rituals were pure, and that their destruction was an injustice of the highest order. The crowd murmured in shock. The officials overseeing the execution were stunned. De Molay had not followed the script. Instead of submission, he had offered defiance. Instead of shame, he had given testimony. In that instant, the delicate balance of the trial collapsed. If the Grand Master himself proclaimed innocence with his last breath, what did that say about the charges? What did that say about the king and the pope who condemned him? The response was swift and brutal. Philip IV, furious at the defiance, ordered that de Molay and his fellow leaders be executed immediately. There would be no more hearings, no more negotiations. The fire would silence them once and for all. What was piled high, the stakes driven deep. De Molay and his companion, Geoffrey de Charny, were tied to the pyres. As the flames rose, witnesses reported that the Grand Master remained unshaken. He lifted his voice above the crackling fire, calling upon God to judge those who had condemned him unjustly. And then came the words that would echo through the centuries, a curse uttered against the king and the pope themselves. According to chroniclers, de Molay declared that Pope Clement and King Philip would meet him before God within a year, where divine judgment would reveal the truth. Some accounts claim his words were more specific, damning both men to death within 12 months, calling upon heaven to avenge the wrongs done to the Templars. The crowd was spellbound. This was no ordinary execution. It was prophecy spoken in fire. The Grand Master of the Templars, engulfed in flames, was not broken. He was transformed into a martyr, his final words turning his death into a curse that would outlive him. And then, remarkably, the prophecy seemed to come true. Pope Clement V died just a month later, in April 1314, weakened by illness but seen by many as struck down by divine retribution. King Philip IV followed him in November, killed suddenly by a stroke during a hunting expedition. Both men, architects of the Templars' downfall, were dead within the year, just as de Molay had declared. To contemporaries, this was no coincidence. It was proof that the Templars had been wronged, proof that God himself had answered the cry of the Grand Master. From that moment on, the legend of the Templar curse took root. Chroniclers embellished the tale, whispering that not only Philip and Clement, but their descendants would suffer under the weight of divine vengeance. And indeed, within decades, the once mighty Captivated dynasty of France collapsed. Philip's heirs died young, childless, or in disgrace. By the middle of the 14th century, his line had ended, plunging France into chaos and setting the stage for the 100 Years' War. To many, this was the unfolding of de Molay's curse, rippling outward from the flames of Paris. Whether one believes in curses or not, the symbolism was undeniable. The destruction of the Templars, intended as a display of royal and papal power, became instead a testament to their fear. By silencing the knights, Philip and Clement had given birth to something they could not control, a myth that would endure for centuries. The Templars were no longer simply a military order. They were martyrs, their legacy bound up with fire, prophecy, and vengeance. The burning of Jacques de Molay marked the end of the Templars as an institution, but it also marked the beginning of their immortality. For in that moment, they passed from history into legend. The secrecy of their rituals, the mystery of their supposed heresies, the suddenness of their fall. All of it fused together into a narrative too powerful to fade. The image of the Grand Master, standing proud in the flames, his voice rising above the inferno, would inspire generations of writers, mystics, and seekers of hidden truth. It would fuel conspiracy theories about lost treasures, hidden knowledge, and secret societies that claimed descent from the Templars. And it would forever brand Philip and Clement not as victors, but as villains cursed by history. In the eyes of many, the Templars were destroyed not because they were guilty, but because they were dangerous, not to the faith, but to those who wielded power. And in their destruction, they became more powerful than ever before. The execution of Jacques de Molay was meant to close the book on the order. Instead, it opened a new chapter, one that the Vatican would spend centuries trying to contain. When the flames on the Isle de la Cite consumed Jacques de Molay and Geoffrey de Charny in 1314, the story of the Templars did not truly end. If anything, it entered a new and more dangerous phase. The order had been dissolved, its leaders executed, and its name dragged through the mud. But the echoes of their defiance, the curses spoken in fire, the contradictions in the trials, the sudden deaths of Pope Clement and King Philip, left behind a residue of unease. For Rome, this unease posed a threat more insidious than swords or fortresses, the possibility that people might begin to question whether the Templars had been victims of injustice rather than heretics. The Vatican's response was subtle but effective. Instead of letting the story vanish into oblivion, it buried it under layers of secrecy. The documents from the trials, the confessions, the testimonies, the papal bulls were collected and locked away in the papal archives. For centuries, these records were kept out of sight, accessible only to a handful of officials. In the Middle Ages, this was equivalent to erasing a chapter of history. If ordinary people could not see the evidence, they had no choice but to accept the official narrative. The Templars were guilty, their destruction was just, and the Church had acted to preserve the faith. But why such secrecy if the case was so clear? If the Knights had truly been guilty of the grotesque heresies described, would it not have benefited Rome to publicize the evidence? Instead, the Vatican treated the matter as something dangerous, something that needed to be controlled, sealed, and monitored. This has led many to wonder, what exactly was locked away? Were the archives merely full of contradictory testimonies that embarrassed the papacy, or did they contain something even more explosive, evidence that the charges were fabricated, or worse, that the Templars had indeed uncovered knowledge the Church did not want the world to see? The whispers of hidden treasures and lost documents only grew louder in the centuries that followed. Some claimed that the Templars, before their fall, had spirited away their greatest secrets, scrolls found beneath the Temple Mount, relics of the early Church, perhaps even the Holy Grail itself. These treasures, the story goes, were hidden in remote strongholds, carried aboard ships that vanished from the ports of La Rochelle, or entrusted to allies in lands beyond Philip's reach. Yet another possibility lingers, darker still, that some of these artifacts were seized during the arrests and now lay in the vaults of Rome, preserved but never revealed. The Vatican's archives are a world unto themselves, vast beyond imagination. Today, they stretch for miles beneath the Apostolic Palace, containing manuscripts, letters, maps, and records spanning more than a millennium. Among them are said to be the original parchments from the Templar trials. Some have been made public in recent decades, but the secrecy surrounding them for so long has fueled suspicion. If there was nothing to hide, why keep them locked away for nearly 700 years? One particularly curious document, rediscovered in the Vatican archives, in 2001, was the so-called Chinon parchment. This record revealed that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templar leadership of heresy in 1308. In other words, while publicly allowing the order to be destroyed, the Pope had privately declared them innocent of the charges that had justified their persecution. The discovery was explosive. It suggested that the Vatican had known, even at the time, that the accusations were hollow, yet had cooperated with Philip out of political necessity. For centuries, this absolution had been hidden, forgotten, or perhaps deliberately suppressed. If the Shinnon parchment could lie buried for so long, what else might still be concealed? Some researchers argue that the Templars' exposure to the Holy Land could have brought them into contact with ancient scrolls, lost gospels, or teachings suppressed by the early church. These texts, if ever made public, might have undermined Rome's authority, offering alternative visions of Christ or revelations about the origins of Christianity. Could fragments of these writings be hidden in the archives, classified under layers of secrecy, their existence too dangerous to admit? Others point to relics. The Templars were rumored to possess the Shroud of Turin centuries before it appeared in recorded history. Was this relic once in their hands, only later emerging in Europe under mysterious circumstances? Were other sacred objects, perhaps linked to Solomon's Temple or to early Christian communities in Jerusalem, seized during the arrests and quietly transferred to papal custody? The silence of the Vatican does nothing to dismiss these possibilities. It only deepens the mystery. The cover-up served another purpose as well. It controlled the narrative. By keeping the records secret, the Vatican ensured that future generations could not easily reassess the trial. The Templars remained heretics in the popular imagination, their curse remembered, but their defense forgotten. In this way, the Church contained a dangerous story, shaping memory to protect its own authority. It was not until modern times, when scholars began to access the archives, that the truth of the contradictions began to emerge. By then, the damage had long been done. Yet secrecy has a paradoxical effect. What is hidden often becomes more alluring than what is revealed. The Vatican silence turned the Templars from condemned knights into martyrs of mystery. Every locked door, every forbidden shelf, every sealed scroll became an invitation to imagine what lay behind it. Were the Templars protectors of a holy bloodline? Guardians of esoteric knowledge that contradicted church dogma? Custodians of artifacts capable of rewriting the story of Christianity? The lack of answers became fertile soil for speculation, legend, and myth. This is why the Vatican's role is so pivotal. The destruction of the Templars was not merely an act of royal greed or papal weakness. It was also the beginning of a centuries-long struggle over memory itself. The knights were not only executed in body, they were erased in spirit, their words silenced, their rituals misrepresented, their absolution buried. And yet, despite this, their legend has only grown stronger, precisely because of the silence that surrounds them. The Vatican may have succeeded in suppressing the order, but in doing so it created a mystery larger than any truth it might have revealed. By hiding the records, it preserved not clarity, but suspicion. By controlling the narrative, it invited generations to question what was left unsaid. And by sealing away the Templar story, it ensured that their ghost would haunt history forever. The destruction of the Templars and the secrecy of the Vatican archives force us to ask a central, haunting question. What exactly did the Knights Templar bring back from Jerusalem that was so threatening to the Church's authority? For decades, they had occupied the Temple Mount, the most sacred and contested ground in the Holy Land. From the year 1120 until the loss of Jerusalem in 1187, the Templars made the site of Solomon's Temple their headquarters. And it is here, beneath the ancient stones of the Haram al-Sharif, that legend says they uncovered something extraordinary. The Temple Mount was no ordinary fortress. For Jews, it was the site of the first and second temples, the dwelling place of God's presence on earth. For Christians, it was tied to Christ's teaching and prophecy. For Muslims, it was the noble sanctuary crowned by the Dome of the Rock. The Templars, given control of this sacred space by King Baldwin II, had access to subterranean passages and ruins that had lain untouched for centuries. Chroniclers tell us they conducted excavations, though the details are vague. Some accounts hint at frantic digging, as if the knights were searching for something specific, something hidden since the days of Solomon. What could have been? One theory suggests they unearthed sacred relics. The Ark of the Covenant, long lost after the Babylonian conquest, was believed by some to still be buried beneath the temple. To possess, it would have meant holding the most powerful religious symbol in Judeo-Christian history, a chest said to radiate divine energy and even destroy enemies in battle. Could the Templars have found it, or perhaps fragments of it, and brought it into their secret rituals? Others argue that the Templars recovered ancient scrolls, lost texts of the early church. Imagine what it would mean if they had discovered documents contradicting the canonical Gospels. Alternative accounts of Christ's life, teachings that emphasized a mystical or human side of his mission rather than the divine authority of Rome. The Nag Hammadi texts, discovered in Egypt centuries later, showed us how diverse early Christianity truly was. Could the Templars have had access to something similar, long before the modern world was ready to hear it? If so, such writings would have been dynamite, threatening the very foundations of papal power. Still others whisper that the Templars uncovered secret knowledge, not only of faith, but of science. The Temple of Solomon, according to biblical descriptions, was constructed with incredible precision. Some esoteric traditions believe it encoded sacred geometry, astronomical alignments, and hidden wisdom about the cosmos. If the Knights stumbled upon archives of ancient science, knowledge handed down from older civilizations, they might have carried back teachings far ahead of their time. Such wisdom, placed in the hands of a military order loyal not to Rome, but to its own grandmaster, would have been intolerable to the Church. Clues to these discoveries echo faintly in the accusations against them. During the trials, the Templars were accused of worshipping a mysterious idol called Baphomet. The word has puzzled historians ever since. Some suggest it was a corruption of Muhammad, an attempt to smear the Knights as secret Muslims. Others believe it was a code, a cipher hiding deeper truths. Certain esoteric writers interpret Baphomet as a symbol of hidden wisdom, a fusion of opposites, perhaps representing the dual knowledge the Templars had unearthed, the sacred and the profane, the spiritual and the earthly. If this was indeed an artifact or symbol carried from Jerusalem, then perhaps the Church saw in it a rival theology, one that could destabilize the fragile unity of medieval Christendom. The Templars' sudden rise in wealth and influence also raises questions. How did an order of poor knights transform into Europe's most sophisticated financial institution in less than a century? While much of their success can be attributed to clever organization and royal patronage, some whisper that they had access to knowledge that gave them an advantage, a hidden treasure of wisdom, not gold. Was it information about trade routes, navigation, or even technologies unknown to their peers? If so, it might explain the legends of Templar voyages across the seas, perhaps even to lands far beyond Europe, centuries before Columbus. The possibility that the Templars carried something out of Jerusalem is strengthened by the timing of their fall. When King Philip ordered the arrests in 1307, the fleet of Templar ships at La Rochelle mysteriously disappeared. Chroniclers say dozens of vessels simply vanished, carrying knights, treasures, and records. Where did they go? Some claim they sailed to Scotland, others to Portugal, or even across the Atlantic. Whatever the truth, this disappearance suggests that the Templars were prepared, as though they knew their suppression was coming, and had already safeguarded their most precious possessions. But let us return to the Vatican. If the Knights had indeed brought relics or texts to Europe, and if some of these were captured in the raids of 1307, they would have passed swiftly into papal custody. What would Clement V and his successors have done with such discoveries? If it were relics, say, the Ark or fragments of it, the Church could never reveal them without legitimizing the Templars' possession. If it were heretical gospels, revealing them would fracture Christendom. Silence was the only option. Lock them away, deny their existence, and ensure the world never knew what had been found. The secrecy of the archives makes this scenario plausible. The Chinon parchment proved that the Vatican was capable of hiding documents for centuries when they conflicted with its interests. If they could suppress a papal absolution, how much more would they hide dangerous relics or texts? The absence of evidence, in this case, is itself suggestive. Legends that followed only added to the fire. Stories arose of the Templars as guardians of the Holy Grail, protectors of Christ's bloodline, or keepers of an eternal flame of wisdom. These tales may be romantic, but they echo a deeper truth, that the Templars were seen, even centuries after their fall, as custodians of something sacred and hidden. Whether that something was a chalice, a scroll, a relic, or knowledge itself hardly mattered. The perception that they had held a secret too powerful for Rome to allow has endured. And here lies the core of the mystery. What if the Vatican silence is not simply about embarrassment or politics, but about safeguarding truths that could shatter the Christian narrative as we know it? If the Templars returned from Jerusalem carrying evidence of a different Christ, a different church, or a different destiny for humanity, then perhaps their destruction was not about wealth or power alone. Perhaps it was about control over memory, over meaning, over the story of salvation itself. The flames that consumed Jacques de Molay may have silenced his voice, but they could not erase the question that still burns. What did the Templars truly find beneath the stones of Solomon's temple? The mystery of what the Templars unearthed beneath Jerusalem cannot be separated from one of the most enduring legends in Western history, the quest for the Holy Grail. From medieval romances to modern novels, the Grail has stood as a symbol of ultimate spiritual truth, hidden and protected across the centuries. But the question rarely asked is this: why did the Grail legend suddenly flourish in the very era of the Templars in the late 12th and early 13th centuries? Was this merely coincidence, or was it a subtle echo of something the Knights themselves had discovered? The Grail, in its earliest appearances, was not a chalice at all. In Chrétien de Troyes Perceval, circa 1180, the Grail is described as a mysterious dish or vessel carried in a solemn procession. Later romances would transform it into the cup used by Christ at the Last Supper, or the vessel that caught his blood at the crucifixion. Still later, it became entwined with the idea of Christ's bloodline itself, preserved in secrecy through generations. Whatever its form, it always symbolized something hidden, sacred, and transformative, a truth too great to be revealed openly. The timing is suggestive. These stories emerged just as the Templars were consolidating their power and influence in Europe. Some scholars believe the Grail romances were coded allegories, ways of communicating esoteric truths without provoking the wrath of the Church. Could the Grail stories have been veiled reflections of the Knights' discoveries in Jerusalem, treasures of faith and knowledge that had to be disguised as myth to avoid suppression? One theory is that the Templars possessed an actual relic, a vessel, perhaps even the very chalice used at the Last Supper. The Crusades had brought countless relics from the east to the west, some genuine, many spurious. Yet the Templars' privileged access to the Temple Mount and their reputation for secrecy set them apart. If they did possess such a relic, its significance would have been staggering. The Eucharist, the central sacrament of the Catholic Church, was founded on Christ's command to share bread and wine in remembrance of me. To hold the original vessel would have been to hold the cornerstone of Christian ritual. The Vatican could never allow such a relic to remain in the hands of a semi-independent military order. Another strand of the Grail mystery links it not to objects but to blood. The idea of the Grail as a symbol of Christ's bloodline, popularized in modern times but rooted in older whispers, suggests that the Templars may have stumbled upon genealogical records or Gospels indicating that Christ left descendants. Such a revelation would have been catastrophic for Rome. If Christ's legacy was not a church, but a family, then the entire structure of papal authority would be undermined. The Church could never acknowledge such evidence without tearing its own foundation apart. Was this, perhaps, the ultimate secret the Templars carried back from Jerusalem, one that had to be silenced at any cost? The relic theories extend beyond the Grail. Some claim the Templars were guardians of the Shroud of Turin long before its documented appearance in the 14th century. The shroud, bearing the faint image of a crucified man, has long been associated with Christ. Its sudden emergence in France, shortly after the Templars' fall, raises tantalizing questions. Could this relic have once been in their possession, confiscated during the arrests, and quietly passed into the Church's custody? If so, it would explain why the shroud's early history is so murky, its trail lost in the shadows of the very era when the Templars disappeared. Other legends tie the Knights to fragments of the True Cross, the Spear of Longinus, or even relics connected to Mary Magdalene. Each of these would have carried immense spiritual weight, and each, if entrusted to the Templars rather than the Vatican, would have represented a rival source of sacred authority. Imagine an order of warrior monks, independent of Rome, possessing relics more powerful than those in the Church's cathedrals. It would not only embolden the Templars, but also draw pilgrims, wealth, and devotion away from the papacy. For Philip and Clement, this would have been intolerable. The Grail legends also resonate with the charges of heresy. The Knights were accused of spitting on the cross, of denying Christ, of worshipping idols. These accusations sound shocking, until we ask whether they might have been garbled distortions of secret rituals rooted in alternative traditions. If the Templars held relics or knowledge that contradicted Rome's narrative, they may have developed rites to honor those truths, rites misunderstood or deliberately twisted by their enemies. In that sense, the charges of heresy could have been both slander and inadvertent revelation, hinting at a deeper, hidden current of belief. We must also consider the symbolic dimension. Whether or not the Templars held physical relics, the Grail may represent a different kind of treasure, knowledge itself. To medieval minds, knowledge was not abstract. It was power, sacred and dangerous. The Templars' time in the East may have exposed them to mystical traditions, from Jewish Kabbalah to Islamic Sufism. Perhaps their Grail was the fusion of these teachings with Christian faith, producing a secret doctrine that challenged Orthodox theology. If so, the Grail was not a cup but a wisdom tradition, one that could transform those who encountered it. Such a treasure would indeed be worth killing to suppress. The Vatican's reaction, then, makes more sense. If the Templars were merely guilty of greed or ambition, a straightforward condemnation would have sufficed. But if they carried relics or knowledge that could rival Rome's claim to ultimate authority, then silence and secrecy became essential. Better to brand the Knights as heretics and destroy them than to let their treasures be revealed. Better to seal away the evidence than to risk the faithful learning that salvation might lie outside the Church's control. And so the Grail legend persisted, a ghostly memory of something once held and then hidden. From Wolfram von Eschenbach Parzival to Mallory's Le Morte d'Arthur, the stories carried echoes of guardians, quests, and hidden truths, always tantalizing, never fully explained. It is as if medieval poets were circling around a secret they dared not name, hinting at what could not be spoken directly. In this way, the Grail became both a symbol and a cipher, pointing toward a mystery that began, perhaps, with the Templars themselves. What remains today is the tantalizing silence. No definitive relic has been produced, no hidden gospel revealed, no Grail displayed. And yet the persistence of the legends suggests that something real lies at their core. The Vatican's secrecy only deepens the suspicion. Were the Grail and other relics once in the hands of the Templars, only to be confiscated and hidden away? Or were they spirited out of France, carried aboard the vanished fleet, entrusted to unknown guardians in distant lands? The Grail, whatever it was, remains the perfect symbol for the Templars' legacy. Something hidden, powerful, and transformative, something the Vatican could not allow the world to see. When King Philip's orders swept across France on that October morning in 1307, one detail went strangely unrecorded in the official chronicles: the fate of the Templar fleet anchored at La Rochelle, the Order's bustling Atlantic port. Dozens of ships, well provisioned and crewed, had long been stationed there, serving the Templars' far-reaching trade and banking networks. Yet when royal agents arrived, expecting to seize vessels loaded with treasure and supplies. The harbor lay empty. The fleet, it seemed, had vanished into the dawn. This disappearance has become one of the great unsolved puzzles of history. What happened to those ships? Where did they go? And more importantly, what were they carrying? The simplest explanation, of course, is that the knights had been warned. Rumors of Philip's plot had circulated for weeks. It is entirely possible that the Order's leadership anticipated the arrests and quietly ordered their vessels to sail before the hammer fell. If so, this was no panic flight, but a calculated evacuation. The fleet would not have set sail without a destination in mind, and without cargo worth protecting. But cargo of what kind? Some argue that the ships carried gold, silver, and portable wealth, spirited away to keep it out of Philip's greedy hands. Others believe they bore something far more precious: the archives, relics, and perhaps even the secrets of the Templars' discoveries in Jerusalem. If the knights had unearthed hidden gospels, sacred relics, or treasures tied to Solomon's temple, then the fleet may have been their final safeguard, ensuring that these artifacts did not fall into papal custody. The destinations proposed are as varied as they are tantalizing. One theory points to Scotland, then under excommunication and thus beyond papal authority. The exiled Templars arriving there may have allied with Robert the Bruce, whose forces would defeat the English at Bannockburn in 1314. The same year Jacques de Molay went to the stake. Some have even suggested that mysterious knights appearing on the battlefield, rallying Bruce's army, were fugitive Templars repaying their hosts with military aid. Another possibility lies in Portugal. Unlike Philip, the Portuguese monarchy had little interest in destroying the Templars. In fact, King Denis reconstituted the remnants of the order under a new name, the Order of Christ. Many Templars simply changed their mantles, continuing their mission under royal protection. The Order of Christ would later sponsor the great voyages of discovery, including those of Henry the Navigator, Vasco da Gama, and ultimately Columbus himself. Was this continuity mere coincidence, or was it the direct survival of Templar seafaring knowledge carried from La Rochelle? Some theorists push the boundaries even further. They argue that the fleet may have sailed across the Atlantic, reaching the shores of the New World centuries before Columbus. Evidence of this is tantalizing but inconclusive. Mysterious carvings, unexplained European artifacts, and indigenous traditions of pale-skinned visitors bearing crosses. Could the Templars have established outposts in distant lands, planting seeds of hidden colonies beyond the reach of kings and popes? If so, the fleet was not merely an escape. It was a beginning, a new phase in their mission. What unsettles historians most is not the lack of certainty, but the fact that official records go silent. For an event of such magnitude, the disappearance of an entire fleet, the chroniclers are strangely muted. Silence often tells its own story. Was this absence deliberate? Did the Vatican suppress mention of the fleet's fate to obscure the survival of the order? If so, then perhaps the real treasure of La Rochelle was not gold or relics, but continuity, the continuation of an idea, a brotherhood, a mission that could not be extinguished by fire and decree. Legends of survival abound. In Masonic lore, the Templars are said to have gone underground, preserving their rights in secret brotherhoods that eventually blossomed into modern Freemasonry. In folk tales, they appear as shadowy guardians of the Grail, protectors of a secret lineage that continues to this day. Even in historical records, faint traces emerge, knights appearing in unexpected places, orders reconstituted under new names, financial networks continuing under veils of legitimacy. It is as if the order itself became the Grail, hidden, elusive, always just beyond reach. For the Vatican, this possibility posed a problem. If remnants of the Templars had survived, carrying with them dangerous relics or knowledge, then the destruction of the order had not been complete. The Church may have succeeded in silencing the official record, but the ghost of the fleet remained, a reminder that some secrets had slipped through their fingers. Perhaps this is why the Vatican maintained such rigid control over the narrative, locking away documents, discouraging inquiry, and branding the Templars as heretics long after their deaths. The less attention paid to their survival, the safer Rome's authority remained. But the legend of the fleet refused to die. Across centuries, it resurfaced in whispers of lost colonies, of knights guarding treasures in faraway lands, of maps drawn from knowledge older than the age of exploration. The very idea that the Templars had carried their secrets across the seas infused later explorers with a sense of destiny, as if they were following trails blazed long before. Indeed, some early maps used by Columbus and others bear symbols and place names that do not neatly fit with contemporary knowledge. Did these come from archives preserved by the heirs of La Rochelle's vanished fleet? The disappearance of the Templar fleet embodies the essence of their story. Absence that feels like presence, silence that speaks louder than words. We do not know what sailed from La Rochelle that fateful night, nor where it landed, nor what it carried. But the fact of its disappearance, coupled with the Vatican's silence, leaves open a space for speculation, for legend, for possibility. And in that space, the Templars live on, not as extinguished heretics, but as enduring guardians of mysteries that remain unsolved. In the end, perhaps the fleet's greatest treasure was its very elusiveness. By vanishing, the Templars denied their enemies the satisfaction of total victory. They ensured that the story would never be closed, that questions would linger, that seekers in every generation would look for signs of their survival. Whether in the mists of Scotland, the coasts of Portugal, or the uncharted shores of the New World, the vanished fleet became a vessel not only of relics and secrets, but of hope that truth cannot be burned, that mysteries cannot be buried, and that the legacy of the Templars would continue to haunt the world long after the flames of Paris had died. By the time Jacques de Molay's ashes scattered over the Seine, the Vatican and the French crown believed the Order of the Temple had been annihilated. Its leaders were dead, its wealth confiscated, and its reputation reduced to ash. But history rarely moves so neatly. Ideas, traditions, and symbols have a way of slipping through the cracks of official decrees. And in the centuries that followed, the figure of the Templar reemerged, not as a crusading knight on horseback, but as a hidden influence woven into the fabric of Europe's secret societies. The first whispers of this survival came not in chronicles, but in legends. In Scotland, where papal authority was weakened by excommunication, fugitive knights were said to have found refuge. The Battle of Bannockburn in 1314, fought the same year as de Molay's execution, became central to this narrative. Chroniclers described a sudden charge of fresh troops that broke the English lines. Later folklore claimed these were Templars, exiled warriors who had pledged loyalty to Robert the Bruce in exchange for sanctuary. True or not, the tale captured something deeper, the belief that the Templars had not been extinguished but had simply shifted into the shadows. By the 15th and 16th centuries, strange symbols began to surface in the lodges of Europe's stoneworkers. These symbols, compasses, squares, pillars, and the image of Solomon's temple, echoed motifs long associated with the Templars. Over time, these lodges transformed from trade guilds into speculative fraternities, places where philosophy, mysticism, and esoteric teachings could be exchanged beyond the gaze of church authorities. Out of this transformation emerged the society we know today as Freemasonry. Could the Masons have been the spiritual heirs of the Templars? Many researchers think so. The rituals of Freemasonry speak of lost knowledge, secret building traditions, and a quest for a hidden truth buried beneath Solomon's temple, the very site where the Templars had once dug. Initiation ceremonies echo themes of death and resurrection, much like the Order's own myths of martyrdom and survival. Even the legendary Baphomet, once used to damn the Templars, reappears in esoteric Masonry as a misunderstood symbol of balance and wisdom. The connection is more than symbolic. In 1737, Andrew Michael Ramsay, a Scottish-born Freemason, gave a famous oration in Paris declaring that the origins of Freemasonry lay not in medieval guilds, but in the knights who had defended Jerusalem. Ramsay claimed that these knights, after the fall of the Holy Land, carried their traditions back to Europe, disguising them in the rituals of stoneworkers to preserve their teachings. Whether or not this was true, the speech electrified audiences and solidified the link between Templars and Freemasons in the popular imagination. The Vatican, of course, watched this development with suspicion. The Church had long feared heresy not only in doctrine, but in organization. A secret brotherhood, operating beyond papal oversight, carrying hints of ancient knowledge, was precisely the kind of structure Rome had tried to destroy in 1312. And now, centuries later, it seemed to rise again under a different name. The Church condemned Freemasonry repeatedly, beginning in the 18th century, declaring it a nest of heresy and conspiracy. Yet the very vehemence of the condemnations only fueled speculation. What was it about this brotherhood that so unnerved Rome? The answer may lie in continuity. If even fragments of the Templar tradition survived, passed down through hidden networks, then the Vatican's great victory in 1314 had not been complete. The heretics had not been extinguished. They had gone underground, continuing their mission in secrecy. Over time, these fragments could have blended with other esoteric traditions, Kabbalah, alchemy, Hermeticism, producing the eclectic philosophy of Freemasonry. But at the root of it all was the same impulse, to guard a hidden truth, to preserve a treasure of knowledge too dangerous to reveal openly. Legends of hidden Templar influence did not stop with the Masons. In southern France, the Cathar country where heresy had once flourished, stories persisted of Templar guardians watching over caves and castles, protecting treasures from prying eyes. In Portugal, the Order of Christ openly carried on Templar traditions, eventually financing the voyages of exploration that expanded Europe's horizons. In Switzerland, some claim the discipline and secrecy of the cantonal militias bore the stamp of Templar survival. Everywhere one looks, faint echoes of the order seem to linger, as if the Knights had dissolved into the bloodstream of Europe rather than perished outright. And always, the Vatican remained silent. The archives stayed sealed, the contradictions buried, the questions unanswered. By refusing to clarify the truth, the Church allowed the myths to grow unchecked. Was this by design or by accident? Silence can sometimes be more powerful than words. It can create an aura of mystery that feeds speculation across generations. The Vatican may have believed it was protecting its authority by refusing to acknowledge the Templars' secrets. In reality, it ensured that the Order's ghost would never rest. This is the paradox at the heart of the Templar story. If the Knights had simply been exposed as common criminals, their memory would have faded into obscurity. But the combination of violent suppression and deliberate secrecy transformed them into something more enduring, a symbol of hidden truth, an archetype of forbidden wisdom. Every secret society that followed, Masons, Rosicrucians, Illuminati, could trace its lineage, in spirit if not in fact, back to the burning embers of the temple. And so, through the centuries, the Templars survived, not as flesh and blood, but as myth and symbol, their legacy carried in the rituals of lodges, in whispered stories of hidden treasures, in the suspicion that beneath the surface of history lies another story, one too dangerous to be told. The Vatican, in trying to bury them, had planted a seed that would grow in secret, sprouting new branches across time. Whether in the hands of Freemasons, in the voyages of explorers, or in the pens of poets, the Templar mystery lived on, proof that some fires cannot be extinguished, even by the mightiest powers of kings and popes. When the fires of the Inquisition burned their brightest in the early 14th century, it seemed that heresy and forbidden wisdom had been reduced to ash. Yet just 2 centuries later, Europe would find itself in the midst of an extraordinary rebirth. The Renaissance was not merely a revival of art and learning. It was the resurfacing of long-suppressed ideas, echoes of ancient traditions, esoteric teachings, and knowledge once hidden in cloisters, secret brotherhoods, and perhaps even in the guarded traditions of the Templars. The timing is striking. The Black Death had devastated Europe, shaking faith in established institutions. The 100 Years' War had drained kingdoms of resources and morale. And in this atmosphere of disillusionment, new ideas began to circulate. Dangerous ideas about human potential, hidden truths, and the rediscovery of wisdom that the Church had long sought to suppress. What if, buried within this intellectual awakening, were remnants of Templar knowledge, resurfacing in coded symbols and hidden texts? At the heart of the Renaissance stood Florence, a city pulsing with art, commerce, and secrecy. The Medici family, bankers to kings and even popes, cultivated not only financial power, but also esoteric knowledge. They funded the translation of ancient Hermetic texts, works that spoke of divine wisdom, alchemy, and the power of man to shape his own destiny. These texts had been suppressed during the Middle Ages, deemed dangerous to orthodoxy. Yet suddenly, they re-emerged, just as the legends of the Templars began to resurface. The parallels are uncanny. The Templars have been accused of venerating a mysterious head, possibly a symbol of hidden wisdom. Renaissance scholars now studied the Hermetic maxim, as above, so below, a philosophy that mirrored the balance and duality once attributed to the Templar Baphomet. The Templars have been rumored to excavate beneath Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, seeking forbidden knowledge. Renaissance architects and masons, drawing inspiration from esoteric geometry, now constructed cathedrals and palaces infused with mystical symbolism. It was as though the current of suppressed wisdom, forced underground by fire and decree, had quietly returned to the surface under new disguises. The Vatican watched this with unease. On one hand, the Church benefited from Renaissance art, the glorious frescoes of Michelangelo, the grandeur of St. Peter's Basilica. But beneath the surface, currents of knowledge moved that were not so easily controlled. Secret academies debated astrology, alchemy, and the Kabbalah. Nobles and scholars whispered of cosmic truths that undermined the rigid authority of Rome. If Templar traditions had indeed survived, through Portugal's Order of Christ, through hidden lodges in Scotland, through whispered teachings preserved in exile, then the Renaissance was fertile ground for them to blossom. Consider Portugal's role. After the suppression of the Templars, King Denis of Portugal had transformed them into the Order of Christ, officially sanctioned but spiritually continuous with the Old Order. This organization became the backbone of Portugal's age of discovery. Prince Henry the Navigator, a Grand Master of the Order, launched voyages that reshaped the world. The Templars' old dream of Jerusalem was reborn as the dream of global exploration, carrying the cross not to the Holy Land, but across oceans. The Renaissance thirst for knowledge, maps, and new horizons aligned perfectly with this mission. Was this mere coincidence, or the hidden survival of a Templar vision? As the Renaissance gave way to the Enlightenment, the influence of secret societies grew stronger. In lodges and salons, philosophers questioned authority, championed reason, and spoke of natural rights, concepts that would eventually ignite revolutions. But beneath these ideals lay a deeper current, the sense that knowledge had been stolen from humanity, hoarded by institutions, and needed to be reclaimed. This sentiment resonated powerfully with the myth of the Templars, whose treasures and wisdom were said to have been suppressed by the Vatican. Freemasonry, now well established by the 17th and 18th centuries, embraced this narrative. Its rituals invoked Solomon's Temple. Its symbols echoed ancient mysteries, and its mythology often pointed back to the Templars as precursors. Enlightenment thinkers such as Voltaire and Goethe dabbled in Masonic lodges, where the line between philosophy and esotericism blurred. To them, the Templars were not heretics but martyrs of knowledge, destroyed by tyranny yet immortalized in secrecy. The Vatican, meanwhile, doubled down on its opposition. Papal bulls thundered against Masonry, warning of diabolical plots and heretical oaths. Yet the more the Church condemned, the more the mystery deepened. Why did the Vatican fear these groups so intensely? Was it simply their secrecy, or was it the possibility that they carried fragments of truths the Church had long sought to bury? Even the arts of the Enlightenment carried Templar echoes. In music, Mozart, a Freemason, embedded Masonic symbolism into his operas. In literature, writers from Cervantes to later Romantic poets painted knights not as crusaders but as seekers of higher truths. The figure of the Templar shifted in cultural memory from a condemned heretic to a misunderstood guardian of mysteries. By the dawn of the modern era, the Templar myth had fused with the currents of Renaissance humanism and Enlightenment philosophy. What had been condemned as heresy in 1314 was now celebrated as a quest for knowledge, liberty, and enlightenment. The Vatican's attempt to erase the order had backfired spectacularly. Instead of being forgotten, the Templars had become the archetype of hidden wisdom, their legacy entwined with the very movements that reshaped Europe and the world. And so, the Renaissance and Enlightenment were not just cultural movements. They were battlegrounds for memory. On one side stood the Vatican, guarding its version of history. On the other stood secret networks, artists, and philosophers who believed that buried within the ruins of the past lay truths too precious to be lost. The Templars, whether as literal survivors or as enduring symbols, stood at the center of this struggle. By the 18th century, their ghost was everywhere, in Masonic rituals, in revolutionary rhetoric, in the art and architecture of Europe. The suppressed had returned, cloaked in new forms, whispering through centuries. What the Vatican had tried to hide after the death of the last Grand Master now fueled the very currents that challenged its authority. In this way, the Renaissance and Enlightenment did more than revive classical wisdom. They resurrected the Templar myth, ensuring that the knights who had been burned as heretics would live on as the hidden architects of modernity. By the late 18th century, Europe was simmering with ideas that would transform its political order forever. Empires trembled, monarchs wavered, and whispers of liberty spread from salons to streets. At the heart of these upheavals, beneath the slogans of liberty, equality, and fraternity, there lurked older symbols, echoes of suppressed brotherhoods and secret traditions. And in this storm of revolutions, the shadow of the Knights Templar emerged once again. For centuries, the Templar name had remained a specter, destroyed by the church and crown. Their memory lived on through Freemasonry, esoteric societies, and whispered legends of lost treasure and secret wisdom. Now, as the world lurched toward modernity, those whispers seemed to awaken, fueling movements that would not only topple kings, but also threaten the Vatican's grip on history itself. The French Revolution provides the most striking example. In 1789, Paris erupted in fury against monarchy and clerical privilege. The Bastille fell, nobles fled, and the church, long a pillar of authority, became the target of revolutionary wrath. But within the revolution's symbolism lay subtle nods to deeper currents. Revolutionary clubs drew inspiration from Masonic lodges, whose rituals were infused with Templar imagery. Their cries for liberty echoed. Masonic ideals of equality and brotherhood, which themselves carried the DNA of older, suppressed traditions. Perhaps the most haunting link came during the Revolution's radical phase. In 1793, a group of French Freemasons staged a chilling ritual. They declared that Jacques de Molay, the last Grand Master of the Templars, had been avenged. More than 4 centuries after his execution, de Molay's ghost was invoked as a patron of revolution, a symbol of vengeance against both monarchy and church. In this moment, the suppressed history of the Templars resurfaced, not as a relic, but as a rallying cry. The Vatican, watching these events unfold, could not ignore the resonance. The very forces that once condemned the Templars now saw their destruction cast as martyrdom. The revolution had turned their ashes into a symbol of resistance. And as the guillotine claimed king and clergy alike, the church must have wondered, had the destruction of the Templar centuries earlier planted the seed of this upheaval? The American Revolution, too, bore hints of the same current. Many of its leaders, George Washington, Benjamin Franklin, and others, were Freemasons. The symbolism of the new republic was steeped in Masonic imagery. The unfinished pyramid, the all-seeing eye, the emphasis on liberty as a sacred ideal. To the Vatican, such symbolism would have carried dangerous echoes of the old heretical brotherhood. The very language of freedom, born from Enlightenment ideals, may have been nourished by the undercurrents of Templar survival through Masonry. And did not stop there. Across Europe and beyond, the 18th and 19th centuries saw revolutions ripple outward. In Italy, secret societies like the Carbonari adopted Masonic structures and esoteric symbols, carrying forward the same spirit of rebellion. In Latin America, independence leaders often gathered in lodges, invoking ideals that had passed down through centuries of clandestine brotherhood. Wherever old powers fell, there seemed to be a whisper of Masonic, and by extension, Templar, influence. The Vatican's position grew increasingly precarious. The Church, once the supreme authority in Christendom, now found itself besieged on multiple fronts. Secular republics rose where monarchs once reigned. Anti-clerical laws stripped Rome of influence. In 1870, the Papal States themselves were lost, and the Pope was reduced to a prisoner in the Vatican. The long arc of suppression, from the burning of the Templars to the silencing of esoteric knowledge, seemed to have come full circle. The very ideas the Church had tried to extinguish now fueled the movement's dismantling its temporal power. But here lies the deeper mystery. Was this merely coincidence or a continuity? Were these revolutions simply the natural flowering of Enlightenment reason, or were they deliberately nourished by brotherhoods carrying the suppressed torch of Templar tradition? Many researchers point to the continuity of symbols, rituals, and ideals. The Masonic square and compass echoing the Templar fascination with sacred geometry, the revolutionary oaths of secrecy mirroring the vows of the Knights, the rhetoric of liberation resonating with the idea of hidden knowledge stolen from humanity. Some go further, suggesting that behind the public faces of revolutionaries lay secret councils, guardians of a lineage stretching back to Jerusalem, through the ruins of the Temple, and into the hidden vaults of Europe. Whether factual or symbolic, the perception alone was powerful. To the Vatican, it did not matter if Masonic lodges were literal descendants of the Templars. What mattered was that they carried the same spirit of defiance, the same challenge to papal supremacy. The 19th century only deepened the association. Romantic writers resurrected the Templar image, not as heretics but as noble martyrs betrayed by kings and popes. Novels, operas, and paintings turned their story into myth, ensuring that the Templars lived on in the imagination of Europe. Secret societies eagerly drew upon this imagery, claiming the mantle of the Knights as a way of legitimizing their own hidden traditions. The Vatican's silence, its refusal to open its archives, only fed the fire. If there was nothing to hide, skeptics asked, why keep the records sealed? Thus, by the modern age, the Templars had become more than a medieval order. They had become a symbol of suppressed truth, invoked by revolutionaries, secret societies, and even nation-builders. Their execution had not erased them. It had transfigured them into a timeless archetype. The Vatican's great suppression had backfired, creating a myth too powerful to control. This is the irony of history. The more ruthlessly power tries to erase, the more enduring the memory becomes. Jacques de Molay, burned alive in 1314, had cursed both the Pope and the King, calling them to judgment before God within the year. And indeed, both Clement V and Philip IV died shortly thereafter. To revolutionaries centuries later, this was no mere coincidence. It was proof that the Templars carried a force that transcended earthly thrones. And so, in the fires of revolution, the Templars rose again, not as knights on horseback, but as an immortal idea, haunting every cry for liberty, every oath sworn in secret, every challenge to authority. What the Vatican had tried to hide after de Molay's death now stood revealed in the streets of Paris, in the halls of Philadelphia, in the whispered vows of brotherhoods across the globe. The suppression had failed. The legend had one. Beneath the cobbled streets of Rome lies one of the most mysterious repositories of human knowledge, the Vatican's secret archives. Sealed behind heavy doors, guarded by the Holy See, and stretching for miles beneath the surface, this labyrinth of parchment, codices, and manuscripts is said to contain documents dating back more than 1,000 years. For centuries, only popes, select cardinals, and hand-picked scholars have been granted access. To many, it is the closest thing humanity has to a vault of forbidden history. And at the heart of speculation about its contents lies one question. What did the Vatican hide after the last Grand Master of the Knights Templar was burned alive? Officially, the Vatican insists the archives are no more mysterious than any other library. They contain papal correspondence, legal decrees, state records, and documents necessary for the governance of the Church. Yet their secrecy fuels curiosity. Scholars allowed entry are granted only narrow access, restricted to specific documents they request in advance. The wider corridors remain off-limits, their shelves stretching into darkness. Few places on earth embody such an aura of controlled knowledge, such a sense of truths just out of reach. Among the countless rumors about what lies within, few are as persistent as those connected to the Templars. For centuries, researchers have claimed that hidden among the archives are documents that could rewrite history, confessions suppressed, treasures cataloged, secrets sealed by papal decree. Some believe the Vatican possesses detailed records of what was found beneath the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, discoveries that could shake the foundations of both Christianity and Judaism. Others insist the archives contain accounts of the Templars' true beliefs, their rituals, and the real meaning of symbols once twisted into heretical charges. In 2007, a rare glimpse into this mystery surfaced. The Vatican released a document long thought lost, the Shrouded Parchment. Dated to 1308, it revealed that Pope Clement V had secretly absolved the Templar leaders of heresy. The parchment showed that, contrary to centuries of assumption, the Church had not found the knights guilty of blasphemy. Instead, the Templars had been victims of political maneuvering, crushed by King Philip IV of France, whose greed for their wealth and fear of their independence drove the persecution. The revelation stunned historians. If such a document had been hidden for 700 years, what else might remain sealed? The Shrouded Parchment was only the beginning. Its release raised more questions than it answered. Why the Vatican kept it hidden for so long? Was it fear of undermining centuries of teaching? Or was it because the parchment was just the tip of a far greater secret, one that could destabilize the very authority of Rome? Theories abound. Some suggest the Vatican holds Templar writings that describe a bloodline, a sacred lineage reaching back to Jesus himself. Others whisper of alternative gospels, hidden doctrines that the Knights safeguarded after their excavations in Jerusalem. Still others point to artifacts, the Holy Grail, the Ark of the Covenant, or relics of early Christianity spirited away from the Holy Land. The structure of the archives themselves invites speculation. Over 50 miles of shelving are said to run beneath the Vatican, with tens of thousands of volumes still uncatalogued by modern methods. Locked rooms hold the documents of the Inquisition, including the trial records of the Templars. Even today, many of these remain classified, inaccessible to the public. Scholars who have glimpsed them speak of detailed interrogations, contradictions in testimony, and hints at deeper mysteries. Records that suggest the Templars knew something that terrified both Pope and King. To conspiracy researchers, the logic is simple. If the Vatican destroyed the Templars to suppress their knowledge, then the only place where fragments of that knowledge could survive is in Rome's deepest vaults. And if, as some claim, the Order had unearthed secrets beneath Solomon's Temple, secrets about the origins of religion itself, then the Church's decision to hide these documents makes chilling sense. Better to guard dangerous truths than risk their revelation. The secrecy extends into modern times. When Napoleon invaded Rome in 1810, he seized thousands of Vatican documents and shipped them to Paris. Some were returned after his defeat, but others vanished. Did they include records about the Templars? No one knows. Even today, historians note curious gaps in the archives, periods missing, files destroyed, or collections locked away with no explanation. Each silence fuels speculation. Perhaps these are the very records that could connect the Templars to later secret societies, revolutions, or discoveries. The Vatican itself has done little to quiet these rumors. Each occasional release of a document only confirms the suspicion that far more remains hidden. The Church maintains that secrecy is necessary to protect sensitive information. But to those who study the Templars, it feels like a strategy of control, revealed just enough to shape the narrative, but never enough to expose the whole truth. And so the archives remain both a literal and symbolic vault. They're a physical place where knowledge is sealed away, but they're also a metaphor for the Church's grip on history. What lies inside? What secrets could change our understanding of faith, power, and human destiny? The Templars, once burned alive for their supposed heresies, may yet speak from those shelves. Perhaps their writings describe a different vision of Christianity, one not centered on papal authority, but on a more direct, mystical encounter with the divine. Perhaps they contain maps to treasures still undiscovered, relics that could ignite geopolitical struggles even today. Or perhaps they hold something even more unsettling, evidence that the great religions of the world share a common origin, a truth too dangerous for institutions built on division. What we know is this: the Vatican's silence ensures that the mystery endures. The last Grand Master cursed his executioners as the flames rose around him, predicting they would stand before God's judgment within a year. His curse seemed fulfilled, as both Pope Clement V and King Philip IV died shortly thereafter. But perhaps the true curse was not their deaths. Perhaps it was the centuries of secrecy that followed, binding the Church to the very knowledge it sought to suppress. For if the Templars did indeed carry secrets that could unravel the foundations of faith, then those secrets still lie buried, not in ruins or lost vaults, but in the guarded shelves of the Vatican archives. And until the doors are opened, humanity will never know the full truth of what the Vatican hid after the last Grand Master was burned alive. The story of a Knights Templar begins with a handful of knights in Jerusalem and ends, at least on the surface, with a pyre in Paris. But history, as we have seen, does not obey simple beginnings and endings. It coils back on itself, hides in shadows, and resurfaces when least expected. And as we arrive at the climax of this journey, one question still echoes: what exactly did the Vatican hide after the last Grand Master was burned alive? The answer, of course, is not laid out in neat chronicles. It is scattered in fragments of parchment, in whispered traditions, in symbols carried forward by secret societies, and in the guarded vaults of Rome. Yet when the threads are drawn together, a picture begins to emerge, one that is both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Let us return to Jerusalem, to the Temple Mount where the Templars first established their headquarters. The traditional narrative is that they were poor knights, sworn to protect pilgrims. But almost immediately, wealth and influence flowed to them in impossible abundance. Rumors swirled, even in their own time, that they had found something beneath the ruins of Solomon's temple, something that granted them immense power. Was it gold? Possibly. Ancient relics? Likely. But more tantalizing is the possibility of knowledge, scrolls, codices, or relics carrying truths about the origins of Christianity itself. The Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in the 20th century, gave us a taste of how explosive such documents can be. Imagine if the Templars had found earlier writings, perhaps even linked to Jesus or his disciples, that contradicted the official narrative preserved by Rome. Such a discovery would explain why the order grew untouchable, why kings borrowed from them, and why the Vatican ultimately turned against them. Knowledge, after all, is the most dangerous treasure of all. When Jacques de Molay was executed in 1314, the Vatican may have believed it had extinguished both the order and its secrets. Yet history suggests otherwise. The Chinon parchment revealed that Clement V had quietly absolved the Templars, raising the possibility that the Pope himself knew the charges were false. Did he act under the crushing pressure of King Philip IV? Or was he playing a deeper game, silencing the knights publicly while keeping their discoveries privately within church hands? If so, the pyre by the Seine was not an ending, but a cover-up. The Vatican archives, with their sealed shelves, almost certainly hold the continuation of this story. Documents about excavations beneath the Temple Mount. Records of papal councils debating what to do with dangerous findings. Perhaps even evidence of relics smuggled into Rome, relics that could destabilize centuries of doctrine. To open those shelves would be to open Pandora's box, releasing truths that could alter the foundations of Christianity. No institution, especially one as steeped in tradition as the Church, could risk such upheaval. And yet, the story does not remain locked in the Vatican alone. Across the centuries, fragments of Templar tradition leaked into secret societies. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, Illuminati, all borrowed the symbols of the temple, the rituals of secrecy, and the mythology of hidden wisdom. Was this mere romantic imitation, or the survival of a real, hidden lineage? If the latter, then perhaps the Vatican's secret was not total. Perhaps some knowledge slipped through the cracks, carried by exiled knights to Scotland, Portugal, or Switzerland, later to be encoded in revolutionary lodges and Enlightenment ideals. Consider the revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries. Time and again, symbols of Masonry, and by extension, echoes of Templar tradition, appeared at the heart of movements that challenged both monarchy and church. In Paris, the revolutionaries declared that Jacques de Molay had been avenged. In America, the Founding Fathers inscribed Masonic symbols into the very seal of the new republic. Across Europe, secret societies invoked the memory of the knights betrayed by Pope and King. The Vatican must have watched these developments with dread, recognizing in them not only political upheaval, but the return of a ghost it had tried to bury. So what is the great revelation? The truth hidden after the flames consumed the last Grand Master? Perhaps it is not a single artifact or document, but a convergence of truths. That the Templars found something in Jerusalem, knowledge too dangerous to reveal. That the Vatican seized and sealed this knowledge, fearing it would destabilize its authority. And that fragments of this truth survived, escaping into the bloodstream of Europe, resurfacing as secret societies, revolutions, and the restless human hunger for hidden wisdom. The Vatican's silence is itself an answer. Why keep the archives sealed? Why release documents selectively if the truth were mundane? Why condemn Freemasonry so vehemently century after century if it were merely a harmless fraternity? The intensity of suppression points to the magnitude of what is being concealed. It is not the shadow that terrifies, but what casts it. And here lies the most unsettling implication. If the Templars truly safeguarded knowledge that could rewrite religious history, then the struggle of the past 700 years has not been about heresy or orthodoxy, but about control. Control over what humanity is allowed to know. Control over the narrative of salvation, of power, of truth itself. The Vatican may have sought to protect faith by sealing away dangerous knowledge, but in doing so, it ensured that suspicion, conspiracy, and legend would thrive. Today, the legacy of the Templars endures not in armored knights, but in questions that refuse to die. What lies beneath the Temple Mount? What lies in the Vatican archives? Why has the Church guarded these secrets with such intensity for 7 centuries? Each generation rediscovers the mystery, finding in it not only fascination, but a mirror of its own struggles with authority and hidden power. And so, as the story closes, the final revelation is not a single parchment or relic, but a profound truth. The Templars may have died by fire, but their secret lives on in silence. The Vatican still guards it, hidden in the deepest vaults, while humanity circles endlessly around the mystery, sensing that something vast lies just beyond reach. The pyre of 1314 was not the end of the Templars. It was the beginning of a riddle that still burns.